Good evening, everyone. This is a very simple message to the Canadian government to stop arming Israel. And I'm here tonight at the site of Canadian violence, the Lester Pearson building in downtown Ottawa. And the message that you can see here in the building behind me, the Lester Pearson building, these are images of the children and families of Gaza who have historically and continue to be terrorized by the Israeli military. And how appropriate it is that we're here tonight, because Lester Pearson, the man who this building was named after, was a so-called honest broker in the Middle East. But if you actually look at the history, it's very clear that, as Elizabeth McCallum, who was the only Middle East expert at external affairs in the 1940s, noted, we don't give two hoots for democracy when it comes to Palestine. And in fact, there's a book called The Rise and Fall of a Middle Power, in which McCallum passed a note to Lester Pearson saying, because of Pearson's support for partition, the Middle East was now in for 40 years of war due to the lack of consultation with the Arab folks who were being forcibly removed from their land. In the 1940s, the Canadian Arab Friendship League explained, quote, "Our Canadian government at one time favored the creation of a federated state of Palestine, which had at least some resemblance to a democratic solution. Lester Pearson and Justice Ivan Rand changed that official position of our government. Instead of the democratic solution, these gentlemen did their utmost to impose upon the Arabs the infamous partition scheme. The Arab world, I am sure, will remember them." And of course, Lester Pearson was a very strong supporter of the creation of the State of Israel, in large part due to the anti-Semitism of this country, which refused to allow Jewish refugees from the Nazi Holocaust into this country. And at the end of the Second World War, when there was an opportunity to help resettle European Jews in Canada, Pearson said we should instead put our efforts behind the creation of the State of Israel, because that would, quote, take the pressure off, and that Ottawa no longer had to worry about that. And so as we look at this building, it's really critical to talk about how Canada is actually arming Israel. If we look at the last year for which data was available, 2019, Israel was at the top of non-U.S. destinations for export military goods and technology permits. 401 permits were issued by the Canadian bureaucrats in this building. And the way it works with Canadian weapons sales is very simple. Global Affairs, through the Canadian Commercial Corporation, goes around the world and sets up weapons deals, which they then approve. So no conflict of interest there. And in 2019, they sat down with all the human rights violations that are constantly committed against the Palestinian people in the occupied territories 401 times, and certified that it was okay to give these weapons to the Israelis. And so tonight, as we gather outside of this building, the Pearson bunker, a place which has not only approved weapons sales to Israel, it has also approved the $15 billion, the largest weapons deal in Canadian history, to the Saudi regime. And of course, it is also a building that constantly gives weapons permits to all kinds of other human rights violators around the globe. And of course, we don't even log the weapons that go to the United States and then are transferred to a country like Israel. So what can you do? First, let's demand a permanent halt to the sale of Canadian weapons to Israel. I'm asking you to call and write the Global Affairs Minister, Marc Garneau, at 613-996-7267. You can email him as well, and demand that weapon sales to Israel be immediately halted permanently as part of a larger scheme to end all Canadian production and export of weapons. The other thing you can do is that the Canadian government has a $36.6 million drone purchase from the Israelis from Elbit Industries. And Elbit is one of those companies which is involved in all kinds of human rights crimes. So we're calling on Omar Al-Jabra, who's the transport ministry, to cancel that $36 million contract for Israeli drones. And what you can do is you can call and write Omar Al-Jabra. There's his phone number. And the second phone number is Omar's media line. So he's more likely to answer that because, like all politicians, he loves it when the media calls. These are weapons that were, quote unquote, combat tested on Palestinian civilians. Another thing we can do is look at the Canadian-Israeli trade agreements, which result in hundreds of millions in exchanges of everything from nuclear reactors and boilers to precious metals, which again are also used in the production of weapons as well as aircraft, spacecraft, and electronics, machinery, and equipment, which is often a very nice euphemism for the things that go into the bombers, which are currently dropping horrific bombardments on the people of Palestine. What else can we do? Well, you can get involved in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, a wholly non-violent approach to trying to pressure the Israeli government to end the illegal occupation, which goes back to 1967. You can also support Palestinian political prisoners. So this is a Palestinian prisoner solidarity network. Look them up on the internet and look at how you can support those prisoners. In addition, there is something called No Way to Treat a Child, which is a multi-country campaign that is aimed at ending Israel's ongoing detention of Palestinian children, including the torture of Palestinian children as well. So there's plenty of different things that you can do as well. And also, I'd just like to kind of close on a personal note, because when I was growing up, and a lot of us were growing up, we bought the myth that this was this beautiful democracy and that they had gone someplace where no one else had ever gone. Well, that's not exactly what happened. As we know, Israel is a settler colonial state that is built on the dispossession of Palestinian lands. And what happens is they are constantly, whenever those who have been dispossessed speak up and act out, they are mercilessly attacked with colonial violence. And so when I was a kid, what happened is when my grandparents died, we were given these certificates. And I'm just going to show you the certificate. And the certificate says a tree, I'm just having a bit of a problem here in the wind. A tree has been planted in Israel by something called the Jewish National Fund. Now, what is the Jewish National Fund, you might ask? The Jewish National Fund is an organization which has long taken over Palestinian lands. And for decades, well, actually, before the State of Israel was even founded, the Jewish National Fund would use tree planting as a cover to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from their land. So after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the Jewish National Fund took control of most of the land which had been confiscated from the Palestinians. And in the 1950s, they became a quasi-state organization with a policy to lease land only to Jews on an openly discriminatory basis. So there is a campaign that's been going on for a number of years asking the Canadian government to end the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund in this country, given the fact that it is supporting the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And I certainly hope that the trees that were planted in the memory of both my grandmothers know this truth, and that those trees will do their best to help pollinate the resistance to the violence of an apartheid state. So as we wonder, what can we do to end this ongoing violence? Because it's not just the violence that we're seeing this week, the horrific images, the bombings, which have claimed almost 200 Palestinian lives, and over 60 children, babies, have been killed in this campaign of bombing and terror. There's plenty of things that we can do right here. Those of you who are in Canada and who are watching, whether it is demanding that we cancel the purchase of those Israeli drones which were used against the people of Palestine in the Gaza Strip, and demand a permanent halt to the sale of Canadian weapons to Israel, and also the taking away the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund. We also, in doing this work, obviously not only condemn what is taking place by the Israeli military, we also, as always, must insist on condemning anti-Semitism wherever that might happen. And note that criticizing the state of Israel is in no way anti-Semitic. And so, as I leave tonight, we're just going to leave these images up. And as you can see in the reflection, the people in the Global Affairs building who are approving these weapons sales will be looking out their windows tomorrow morning and seeing the pictures of the faces of what it looks like, this young woman screaming in terror as the Israeli fighter bombers fly overhead. So thanks for watching. Stop arming Israeli apartheid. Share this video if you like, and I will post some links when I get home. And take care of everyone out there. And remember, solidarity is a beautiful thing. But in those of us who can do things here at home, let's hold our governments accountable for the crimes that are being committed in our name and the crimes that are being committed in this building. Take care, everyone.